In the beginning, there was silence, an endless dark ocean scattered with stars. But silence does not last forever. The cosmos remembers every scream, every war, every empire that thought itself immortal. And buried deep in that silence, humanity's oldest relic stirred once more: the Black Ship. It was not just a war machine. It was a memory, a flame carried across time, a reminder that humanity had once been enslaved, broken, and nearly erased by the ancient tyrants who ruled the stars. Now, after centuries of waiting, it rose again, not as a relic of defeat, but as the spark of vengeance. The tyrants had not forgotten humanity, though they believed them scattered and powerless, drifting like dust across the void. They had seen a species with fire in their eyes and decided to break it before it grew too strong. Chains, labor camps, and extermination fleets were their answer. But humans had a strange way of turning chains into fuel and suffering into strength, and the Black Ship was the proof. Forged in secrecy, baptized in loss, and hidden away in the shadows of ruined worlds, it carried within it a hunger that no empire could extinguish, the hunger for freedom. When the Black Ship's engines roared to life, the sound did not echo in the void, but it thundered across every human heart still scattered among the stars. To some, it was a whisper of hope. To others, a promise of revenge. And to the tyrants, it was the sound of something they thought impossible: humanity's return. For generations, these rulers had believed themselves untouchable, building palaces in the skies, lording over countless species, declaring themselves eternal. But eternity has cracks, and when the Black Ship emerged, cloaked in shadows and burning with wrath, the cracks began to widen. The ship was not a fleet, not an armada, not the overwhelming force of numbers. It was a single vessel, black as ash, streaked with the scars of old battles. Yet it carried something far more dangerous than size or firepower. It carried memory. Inside its walls were the voices of those who had suffered and fallen, voices that urged the living to rise. The crew that now walked its decks were not generals, not kings, not polished commanders bred for war. They were survivors, scavengers, dreamers, and rebels. They were ordinary men and women forged into warriors by pain, each one carrying the story of a family lost or a world destroyed. And yet, against the might of ancient tyrants, this one ship should have been nothing, a speck of dust against a storm. But the tyrants had made one mistake. They had taught humanity fear, yes, but they had also taught humanity how to endure it. They had shown humans the cruelty of empires, and in doing so, they had ignited something they could never control. The Black Ship was not a relic of war. It was a flame, and flames spread. Rumors traveled faster than light. Across hidden colonies and broken stations, whispers grew. The Black Ship is alive. Humanity fights back. Worlds once silent stirred with defiance. Even enslaved peoples of other species, long crushed beneath the tyrant's iron grip, lifted their heads and began to hope. Because where one dares, others follow. And though the tyrants commanded entire armadas, the fire that humanity carried was contagious. But the tyrants were not idle. From the moment they sensed the Black Ship's reawakening, they turned their gaze toward hunting it down. They remembered humanity's spirit, even if they had tried to bury it beneath centuries of silence. They feared not the ship's weapons, but the unity it inspired. So they unleashed their enforcers, vast war fleets streaking through the stars, determined to extinguish the spark before it became a blaze. The first battles were small, skirmishes in forgotten systems. Yet each time the Black Ship struck, it did not simply win. It left behind something more powerful than wreckage. It left behind courage. Entire planets watched as the Black Ship outmaneuvered warships larger than mountains, its crew fighting not for conquest but survival, not for glory but justice. And when the news spread, fear changed sides. For the first time in centuries, the tyrants felt the weight of doubt pressing against their throne. Still, the crew of the Black Ship knew the danger. They knew their odds. Every star they passed through, every battle they fought, was a knife-edge walk between triumph and annihilation. They were hunted, outnumbered, and outgunned. But each of them had chosen to be there, not because they believed they would live, but because they refused to die as slaves. Humanity's wrath burned in them like a second heartbeat. And so the black ship pressed forward deeper into enemy territory, not hiding, but daring the tyrants to face them. Each move was bold, reckless, almost suicidal. Yet there was a pattern, a purpose. The crew was not just striking at random. They were weaving a path, one that pointed towards something greater, a target hidden in the heart of the Empire itself. Something that, if destroyed, could ignite not just rebellion, but a galactic uprising that no tyrant could survive. The closer they drew, the heavier the weight became. The tyrants gathered fleets, fortresses, and weapons older than human civilization itself. They prepared to crush this rebellion in a single decisive blow. And yet, even as the storm gathered, the black ship moved like a shadow, always one step ahead, always pushing forward. But deep inside the ship, the crew knew a truth they could not speak aloud. They knew that humanity's wrath was not endless. They knew the fuel, the ammunition, the strength of their ship had limits. What was endless was their will. And sometimes, in the face of overwhelming power, will was enough. The flame was burning brighter now, seen across worlds, feared by tyrants, and carried by rebels who dared to rise from the ashes. But a flame can do more than burn. It can consume. It can spread beyond control, igniting everything it touches. And as the black ship approached the heart of the Empire, the crew began to wonder whether they were not only bringing vengeance to their enemies, but also risking the very survival of everything they sought to save. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as the black ship's shadow stretched across the void. The tyrants waited with their blades sharpened. The enslaved watched with hearts racing. And humanity, once thought broken, carried its burning wrath into the center of the storm. But in the silence before the coming fire, one question remained: would the flame of humanity's wrath set the cosmos free? Or would it consume everything in its path, leaving only ash where hope once lived? And with that question burning louder than the ship's engines, the story begins. The silence before the fire was almost worse than the battles themselves. Inside the black ship, the crew moved with quiet purpose, each step echoing against steel walls that carried the weight of centuries. The vessel was old, but alive in a way that no other ship could be. Its core hummed with a strange rhythm, as if it remembered every scar, every battle, every life lost in its name. The crew felt it too. They could not explain it, but they carried the sense that they were not only flying a machine, but a guardian built from the ashes of their ancestors. They were not soldiers in the traditional sense. Many had never fired a weapon until they boarded this ship. Some were miners, hardened by collapsing tunnels and the constant threat of starvation. Others were engineers, salvaging broken stations and starships long abandoned. A few had once been servants to the tyrants themselves, forced to kneel until they learned how to stand again. What bound them together was not training, but loss. Each one had lost a family, a home, a world. Each carried a memory that burned hotter than fear. It was those memories that kept them walking the narrow edge between despair and defiance. The black ship was more than steel and firepower. It was their last chance. Its origins were whispered among the crew, but never confirmed. Some said it was the last warship built before humanity fell, hidden away like a secret seed waiting for the right season to grow. Others believed it had been forged after humanity's defeat, designed in secret by the scattered survivors who refused to accept the end. A few even whispered that it was not built by hands at all, but by something older, something that had chosen humanity as its vessel of vengeance. Whatever the truth, it did not matter. What mattered was that it was here, and it was theirs. The tyrants, ancient and vast, did not fear ships. They had destroyed fleets larger than empires, silenced rebellions before they ever had a chance to breathe. What unsettled them was the fire behind the black ship. The idea that humanity had not only survived, but dared to rise again. It was not the guns, not the engines, not the black steel that haunted them. It was the people inside, their refusal to break, their persistence to keep moving forward even when there was no path. The tyrants had crushed countless species, bending them into obedience or erasing them entirely. But humanity's shadow lingered, too stubborn to fade. The crew often gathered in the lower decks after long shifts, sitting in circles lit only by the faint glow of emergency lights. Here, they shared their stories, not as a way of mourning, but as fuel. A farmer told of fields burned to ash by the Tyrants' war engines. A mother whispered of children taken to camps where no laughter was heard again. A miner spoke of endless years spent digging fuel for the Empire's fleets, his hands raw, his spirit nearly broken, until the day he escaped into the Black Ship's hold. Each story carried pain, but each also carried a spark. When combined, those sparks became a blaze no tyrant could extinguish. The deeper they moved into enemy space, the stranger the signs became. Abandoned outposts, stripped of all life, floated in silence. Worlds burned, not by rebellion, but by the tyrants themselves, as if they feared something greater than humanity's return. The Black Ship's crew began to wonder, were the tyrants united, or was there a fracture forming within their empire? The idea was dangerous. If true, it could mean opportunity, but it could also mean something far worse lurked in the shadows. Every battle left marks on the ship and on the people within it. Burnt hull plating was patched with salvaged steel. Wounds were stitched together in dim-lit med bays with limited supplies. Every victory came at a cost, but each cost hardened the crew further. They were no longer scattered survivors. They were becoming something else, something stronger, bound by shared fire. The Black Ship was shaping them just as they shaped it, yet doubt remained. Some feared that by carrying humanity's wrath into the heart of the Empire, they were not only risking themselves but the survival of every human colony hidden in the shadows. If the tyrants struck back with full force, entire worlds could be lost. But others argued there was no other path. Hiding would only delay the inevitable. Humanity could not live forever in fear. The Black Ship was not just a weapon, it was a declaration, and declarations demanded sacrifice. Still, the mystery of the ship itself lingered. In its deepest depths were doors no one could open, chambers that hummed with energy no engineer could explain. Some claimed they heard voices in their sleep, whispers from the walls, fragments of languages long forgotten. The ship seemed alive, not only reacting to the crew but anticipating them. Each time they faced annihilation, the Black Ship responded with impossible precision, as if it knew what must be done. This unsettled many, but it also inspired them. Perhaps it was not only humanity's wrath that fueled the ship, but something far greater waiting to be unleashed. As they drew closer to the Empire's heart, the tension grew unbearable. The crew felt the weight of countless eyes upon them. The enslaved who prayed for freedom, the rebels who prepared to rise, the tyrants who sharpened their blades. The Black Ship was no longer just a vessel. It was a symbol, and symbols could change the course of history. But history is written in blood, and the tyrants had no intention of surrendering their throne. They had ruled the cosmos for longer than humanity had even reached the stars. They believed themselves eternal, and yet for the first time eternity trembled. The Black Ship burned forward, carrying with it the wrath of a people who had been broken, but never erased. The stars stretched out before them, vast and cold, as the crew prepared for what lay ahead. They did not know if they would live to see the end. They did not know if their flame would free the galaxy or consume it. All they knew was that the tyrants were waiting, and soon fire would meet fire. The Black Ship drifted at the edge of a dead star system, its engines silent, its lights dimmed to match the darkness around it. The crew sat in uneasy quiet, their voices low, their movements tense. They had escaped another patrol, but each encounter seemed closer, each pursuit more coordinated. It was clear now that the tyrants were tightening their net. What was once a ghost ship slipping unseen through the Empire's grip was now hunted with relentless precision. The crew felt the weight of it. Every decision mattered. Every risk could be the one that ended them all. The conflict was no longer just survival. It was a choice between striking boldly or retreating into shadows. Some of the crew believed the ship had to push forward, to hit harder, to make the tyrants bleed in ways they had never expected. Others argued for caution, warning that each attack invited retaliation on human settlements still hidden in the fringes. The argument split the ship in quiet ways, whispers in the mess hall, lingering stares across workstations. They were united by wrath but divided by fear. The captain, as always, said little. Instead, they spent long hours in the command chamber, studying maps, shifting tokens across the glowing star charts. The crew watched with restless eyes, wanting answers, wanting certainty. But the captain gave them neither. What they offered instead was silence, and in that silence, trust, or perhaps a demand for trust. Beneath the surface of strategy and debate, other tensions stirred. The ship's engineer had begun noticing changes in the systems, subtle fluctuations that could not be explained by age or battle damage. Circuits seemed to repair themselves faster than human hands could manage. The engines responded with a precision that no manual adjustment could achieve. In the lower decks, doors that had been sealed since the crew first boarded were beginning to unlock, one by one, without command codes or tools. The ship itself seemed to be awakening, and no one knew why. Some whispered that it was tied to the battles, that each clash with the Tyrants fed something buried deep in the ship's core. Others avoided the thought entirely, fearing what they could not explain. Outside the black ship, the galaxy was shifting. The enslaved races, long silent under the Empire's rule, began to stir. The stories of the black ship's victories spread not as rumors, but as sparks of rebellion. On mining colonies, workers sabotaged their overseers. On agricultural worlds, entire villages refused to deliver tribute. Even in the Empire's glittering capitals, whispers of dissent slipped through the cracks of fear. The Tyrants responded with cruelty, but cruelty only fed the flames. Each atrocity reminded the galaxy of what they endured, and each reminded humanity of why they fought. One subplot unfolded in the shadows of these rebellions. A small group of defectors, once loyal to the Tyrants' fleets, sought to contact the black ship. They claimed to know secrets about the Empire's weakness, hidden vaults where ancient technology lay buried, forbidden even to the Empire's own. But their loyalty was uncertain. Could they be trusted, or were they bait, sent to lure the black ship into a trap? The crew argued fiercely over whether to answer their signal. Trusting outsiders could mean salvation or annihilation. Another conflict grew within the crew itself. Two of its most skilled fighters had begun clashing not with words but with actions. One believed that the black ship should strike directly at the Tyrants' leadership, even if it meant sacrificing themselves in a suicidal assault. The other believed the ship's true purpose was not to destroy, but to inspire, to live long enough to fan rebellion into a storm that could not be stopped. Each represented a different vision of victory. The tension between them spilled into training drills, into briefings, into the quiet hours when the crew gathered in the mess. The captain said nothing, watching, waiting for the moment when the choice would no longer be avoidable. Meanwhile, the Tyrants were not idle. They gathered their war fleets, massive formations of ships larger than cities, each bristling with weapons designed to shatter worlds. But more than ships, they began to unleash something else. Ancient constructs buried in forgotten systems, weapons from the dawn of their empire. These were not machines built for conquest, but for extermination. Rumors spread that the Tyrants had awoken machines capable of burning entire solar systems clean, leaving behind nothing but dust and silence. Whether those rumors were true or not, the fear of them was enough to freeze the blood of even the bravest. The black ship, though cloaked in shadows, could feel the storm building. The crew spoke less now, conserving their words for what mattered. They moved through the corridors with urgency, their eyes heavy, their hands calloused. They were tired, but their exhaustion only sharpened their resolve. Each skirmish, each narrow escape, drew them closer to the heart of the Empire and closer to the unknown purpose that pulled them forward. The mysteries of the ship deepened with each passing day. In the sealed chambers that had begun to open, strange artifacts were discovered. Pieces of metal engraved with symbols no one could read. Devices that hummed softly, pulsing in rhythm with the ship's core. Some crew members believed these were remnants of humanity's forgotten past, technology from before the fall. Others believed they belonged to something older, something not human at all. The captain offered no explanation, only instructing that the artifacts be studied, guarded, and never discarded. The unease grew when one of the crew reported hearing voices in the chambers, echoes that spoke in languages unknown, but carried an unmistakable sense of warning. At first, no one believed them, but soon others heard them too. Faint whispers in the corridors, fragments of sentences that vanished as quickly as they came. It was as if the ship itself was trying to speak, but what it wanted to say remained locked behind riddles and shadows. Despite the uncertainty, the black ship pressed on. It struck at supply depots, freeing enslaved workers. It ambushed patrols, sowing fear into the Empire's fleets. But each strike carried greater risk. The Empire was no longer underestimating them. The patrols grew sharper, the traps more cunning. The black ship survived, but narrowly, its hull scarred, its crew bloodied. Every battle was a victory, but every victory carried a price. The question began to whisper through the crew. How long could they keep fighting before the flame burned itself out? They did not voice it openly, for fear of breaking the fragile unity that bound them. But it lingered in every glance, every sigh, every night spent staring at the ceiling of the bunk. Humanity's wrath was powerful, but wrath alone could not shield them forever. And yet, in the heart of despair, there was something else growing. The enslaved worlds were not just whispering anymore. They were rising. Small rebellions turned into larger ones. Fleets once loyal to the Tyrants defected in secret, carrying supplies and information to the hidden networks of resistance. The galaxy itself seemed to be shifting, its balance no longer certain. And at the center of it all, the black ship burned brighter, its shadow stretching across the stars. But the crew knew this was only the beginning. The Tyrants had not yet shown their full strength. They were waiting, watching, preparing for a strike that would shatter not only the black ship, but the very spirit it carried. The storm was building, and soon it would break. For now, the black ship sailed forward, into darkness, into mystery, into the heart of conflict. The crew carried their wrath, their hope, their doubts, and their fire. The Tyrants carried their ancient power, their fleets, their arrogance, and their fear. Somewhere between them lay the truth of the war to come. And as the stars watched in silence, the question remained. Would humanity's flame consume the Tyrants, or would it consume everything, leaving only shadows in the void? The black ship moved through the void like a shadow with purpose, its engines silent, its hull scarred from battles that would have destroyed any other vessel. The crew worked with a quiet urgency, each action sharp, deliberate, born of the knowledge that they were moving towards something they could not turn away from. The maps glowed faintly in the command chamber, stars shifting into patterns that revealed the truth none of them had wanted to say aloud. They were closing in on the Empire's core. Beyond lay the Tyrant stronghold, a fortress said to be older than memory, a citadel wrapped in fleets and weapons designed to crush hope before it could ever be born. The crew felt the weight of this destination in every breath. Sleep came less often now, replaced by long hours at the stations, running drills, checking weapons, studying strategies that would never feel like enough. The air inside the ship was thick with anticipation, and beneath that anticipation, fear. They had survived longer than they should have. They had inspired more than they ever expected. But the closer they came to the heart of the storm, the clearer it became that survival alone would no longer be possible. To strike at the Empire's heart meant either shattering its chains forever or being destroyed so completely that no one would dare rise again. Whispers filled the ship at night. Some crew members feared they would not live to see another dawn, that their fire would end in the cold silence of space. Others whispered of what might come after, of galaxies freed from tyranny, of humanity reclaiming the place it was denied. Hope and despair lived side by side, each feeding the other, each pushing the crew further than they had thought possible. The strange awakening of the black ship deepened. Systems pulsed with energy that no one could explain, responding to threats before the crew even issued commands. More chambers unlocked, revealing weapons that had not been seen since the earliest days of the human resistance. Shields flared with colors no one recognized, protecting the ship from blows that should have torn it apart. The engineer grew restless, studying the ship's heart, convinced it was not simply a machine, but something more. A creation born not only of human hands, but of sacrifice, memory, and fury woven into steel. And with every step closer to the Empire, the ship itself seemed to burn hotter, hungrier, as if it too longed for the final confrontation. Meanwhile, the galaxy outside was no longer silent. Rebellions that had begun as whispers now rose as shouts. On mining worlds, workers overthrew their overseers, taking up the tools of war with hands once chained to labor. On distant colonies, entire fleets defected, carrying not only weapons but a belief that victory was possible. Even among the Empire's allies, cracks began to spread. The Tyrants still ruled with iron fists, but iron bends when the fire grows too hot. And humanity's fire was spreading faster than they could contain. But rebellion carried cost. For every world that rose, another was burned in retaliation. For every fleet that defected, another was hunted and destroyed. The Empire wanted to remind the galaxy that defiance meant death. Entire cities vanished in flames, their ashes scattered as warnings. The black ship intercepted the broadcasts, and the crew sat in silence, their faces hard, their anger sharpened into resolve. They knew the Tyrants would never allow mercy. Mercy was not in their nature, and that knowledge made the coming clash inevitable. Among the crew, the divide between visions of victory widened. Some believed the only path forward was to strike the Empire's citadel directly, to unleash all their fury in one decisive blow. Others argued that survival was the greater weapon, that so long as the black ship endured, the flame would never die and the galaxy would continue to rise. Each side made its case in hushed voices, their arguments carrying into the mess hall, into the training bays, into the very air they breathed. The captain listened but remained silent, offering no clear answer. The silence itself became a weight heavier than orders. The defectors who had offered information finally reached the ship, their vessel battered, their faces lined with fear. They spoke of the citadel, of the ancient vaults buried beneath it, where the Tyrants stored not only weapons, but secrets, truths about how they had risen to power and what they feared most. They claimed there was a weakness hidden there, a vulnerability that could end the Empire forever. But their words carried the smell of desperation. Some of the crew believed them. Others saw only a trap, one final lure to draw the black ship into destruction. Trust was thin, but the promise of victory was too tempting to ignore. The ship pressed forward, deeper into enemy space, and the Empire's response grew sharper. Patrols turned into ambushes. Ambushes turned into sieges. Each time the black ship slipped through, but not without cost. Hull plating burned. Shields faltered. Lives were lost. The medbays filled with groans, with whispered prayers, with the raw reminder that victory always demanded sacrifice. And yet, each loss only hardened the crew further. They were no longer merely survivors. They were warriors born from the ashes of despair, their pain forged into resolve. Then came the signal. A broadcast unlike any they had intercepted before. It was not a message of fear or domination, but a challenge. The Tyrants themselves had spoken, declaring that the black ship would be destroyed at the gates of their citadel. They promised to end not only the rebellion, but the very memory of humanity, to erase it from the stars once and for all. The crew listened in silence, the words echoing in their bones. But behind the silence there was no fear. There was only fire. The ship approached the final stretch. The stars ahead were crowded with enemy fleets, their numbers vast enough to block out entire constellations. It was more power than the crew had ever faced, more than anyone could imagine. The sheer scale of it pressed down on them, a weight that threatened to crush even their fire. Yet the black ship pressed on, its engines burning with defiance, its crew standing tall despite the odds. They knew this was the moment. Every choice, every battle, every scar had led them here. The atmosphere inside the ship was electric, charged with both dread and determination. The fighters readied their weapons. The engineers whispered to the ship's core, urging it to hold together one battle longer. The captain stood at the command deck, eyes locked on the stars ahead, their silence more powerful than any speech. The crew understood. No words could capture what was at stake. Humanity's wrath had carried them this far. Now it would either ignite the galaxy into freedom or burn itself out forever. The Empire waited, its fleets spread like a wall of steel and fire, its citadel gleaming in the distance like a monument to eternity. The black ship surged toward it, a single flame against the darkness. The crew braced themselves, every heartbeat louder than the last, every breath sharper, every thought consumed by what was about to come. The storm was no longer approaching. It was here. And in the silence before the first shot was fired, the question still burned in every mind. Would this be the moment the Tyrants finally crushed humanity? Or the moment humanity's wrath consumed the cosmos in fire? The wall of enemy ships stretched across the void like a living barricade, each one bristling with weapons powerful enough to level continents. The crew of the black ship had expected this, had prepared themselves for the impossible scale of the battle ahead. Yet just as they steadied their nerves and readied their weapons, something unexpected stirred within the darkness. A pulse rippled through the void, not a weapon's fire, not the engines of a fleet, but something deeper. The black ship's systems shuddered, lights flickering, alarms flashing with warnings no one could interpret. For a moment, the crew thought it was an attack, but the enemy fleets had not yet moved. Whatever had struck them did not come from outside. It came from within. The ship's core flared with energy, brighter and hotter than ever before. The sealed chambers deep in the vessel opened all at once, as though some hidden command had been triggered. Voices filled the corridors, whispers that grew louder, overlapping, twisting into something that felt like both memory and command. The crew staggered under the weight of it, clutching their heads, their eyes wide as if seeing something not present in the physical world. The black ship was not just awakening, it was remembering. And what it remembered shook everyone to their core. Fragments of images seared through their minds. Not the rise of humanity, but its fall. The Tyrants had not been the only enemy. Long before the Empire rose, there had been something else, a darkness that consumed stars and left behind nothing but silence. Humanity had built the black ship not only to fight the Tyrants, but to guard against this other threat, one so terrible that even the Empire had feared it. The ship was more than a weapon of vengeance. It was a warning, a vessel carrying knowledge of a danger that had been buried, denied, forgotten. The crew reeled from the revelation. If the black ship's purpose had always been more than rebellion, then what were they walking into now? Was the Empire's citadel truly their ultimate enemy, or was it a prison holding something far worse? The defectors' words returned to them with new weight. Secrets in the vaults, weapons older than the Empire itself, weaknesses buried beneath the citadel. What if those weaknesses were not cracks in the Empire's armor, but cracks in something sealed away for a reason? The captain stood silently at the command deck, their eyes narrowed, their face pale with something that looked dangerously close to fear. They had known more than they had ever admitted. Perhaps they had suspected this truth all along. The crew turned to them for answers, but the captain gave none. Instead, they only said one thing. "We go forward." The Empire's fleets began to move then, engines blazing, weapons charging. The black ship surged to meet them, but the battle was not what anyone expected. The Tyrants did not fight with the overwhelming fury they had shown before. Instead, their formations shifted into strange patterns, as though they were not only defending the citadel, but channeling something around it. Their ships moved in unison, their weapons glowing not with destruction, but with containment. It was as if the Empire was less interested in annihilating the black ship than in keeping something sealed inside their own fortress. The crew fought fiercely, striking at enemy vessels, weaving through impossible odds. Yet with every blow they landed, with every ship that burned under their fire, the strange pulse from the citadel grew stronger. It shook the black ship, rattled their bones, and filled the void with an energy that felt ancient, hungry, alive. The whispers inside the ship grew louder, voices overlapping until they became a roar. Humanity's wrath, which had carried them so far, now collided with the truth of what they were unleashing. In the midst of the chaos, a new signal burst across their communications. It was not from the Empire nor from any ally. It came from the citadel itself, a voice deep and hollow, speaking in tones that resonated like the echo of a collapsing star. None of the crew understood the words, yet all of them felt the meaning. It was not a threat. It was not a plea. It was a reminder. You are opening the door. The engineer's voice cracked across the comms, their face pale as they studied the ship's core. It's not just reacting, it's synchronizing. The ship is linking to whatever is inside that vault. We're not here to destroy it. We're here to release it. The words hit the crew harder than any weapon. For the first time, fear outweighed fury. Had humanity built its greatest weapon not as salvation, but as the key to something that should never be unleashed? But there was no turning back. The black ship was locked on its path, drawn forward by a force stronger than the crew's will. The Empire's fleets pressed harder, desperate now, no longer fighting the ship alone, but fighting to stop what the ship carried within it. Their desperation told the crew more than words ever could. The Tyrants, for all their arrogance, were afraid. Afraid not of humanity's wrath, but of what lay beneath their citadel. The conflict twisted into something larger than rebellion. The crew was no longer certain of who the true enemy was. The Tyrants were monsters, yes, but what if they were also guardians, holding back something that made even their cruelty seem small? The black ship's fire burned hotter, its weapons tearing through enemy lines, its crew pushing forward with the strength of all they had lost. Yet behind every victory came the shadow of dread, because with every step, the vault drew nearer, and the voices inside the ship grew louder. A second twist revealed itself in the defectors. One of them, under interrogation, broke. They confessed what the Empire had tried to hide. The Citadel was not only the Tyrant's seat of power, it was a seal. Long ago, the Empire had bound an ancient force there, a remnant of the same darkness that humanity once fought. To release it was to risk everything, but to keep it sealed was to leave the Tyrants in power forever. Humanity's wrath was now tangled in a choice far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The crew's debates turned to shouts. Some argued that the Empire's lies could not be trusted, that the Tyrants would say anything to protect their throne. Others insisted the risk was real, that releasing the vault could doom every living world. The captain listened in silence, their face unreadable, until at last they spoke. "Whatever lies in that vault, the Tyrants have used it to control the galaxy. If we are to be free, we must face it, whether it destroys us or not." The black ship tore through the last lines of defense, flames painting the void behind it. The citadel loomed ahead, a fortress of impossible scale, its towers glowing with energy, its surface bristling with weapons that had already begun to fire. The ship shuddered under the barrage, shields cracking, hull screaming in protest. The crew held on, their knuckles white, their hearts pounding. The storm had reached its peak, and just as they braced for the final clash, the citadel itself began to change. Its towers shifted, collapsing inward, transforming into something vast and alive. It was not merely a fortress. It was a lock, and the lock was opening. The crew watched in silence, their fire now tangled with fear. They had come seeking vengeance, seeking freedom, carrying the wrath of humanity into the heart of the Empire. But what if that wrath was the very key to unlocking a darkness greater than the Tyrants themselves? The stars shook with energy, the fleet scattered, and the black ship surged forward, its purpose now twisted, its destiny uncertain. The climax waited just beyond the gates of the citadel, but the crew could not yet see if they were bringing liberation or unleashing the end of everything. The citadel groaned as the lock fully awakened, its vast towers folding into each other like the pieces of an ancient machine. The void lit up with streaks of energy so blinding that the crew had to shield their eyes, though no walls of steel or glass could soften the weight of what was coming. The black ship trembled, its core resonating with the same pulse shaking the enemy fortress. Every heartbeat, every breath, seemed to fall in rhythm with the deep rumble echoing across the galaxy. The crew had thought they were bringing humanity's wrath to bear against the Tyrants. But now they understood. They were unlocking something that might not belong to any living hand. The Empire's fleets surged desperately, throwing everything they had into halting the black ship's advance. Their weapons flared in torrents, a storm of fire that would have shattered lesser vessels. But the black ship pushed through, its dark armor peeling but never breaking, its flame lashing back with a fury that turned the void into an inferno. Human voices filled the comms, rallying, shouting, their determination louder than fear. Yet beneath the noise lay a silence, an awareness that every strike was not only breaking the Empire's grip, but tearing away the last seals that held the unknown locked within the citadel. At last, The black ship breached the inner defenses. The citadel loomed so close that its surface filled every view, glowing veins of light running like rivers across its skin. The vault lay within, and the ship was drawn to it as though bound by destiny. The captains stood still at the command deck, their face calm but hard, carrying the weight of generations. When the ship reached the core chamber, the citadel's outer shell peeled away, revealing the vast heart of the fortress, a sphere of chained light, pulsing with restrained power. It was not a weapon, not in the sense the crew had known. It was alive. The crew gasped as the realization sank in. The Empire had not only ruled with machines of conquest, they had ruled by caging something greater, older, a force that pulsed with hunger and sorrow. The voices that had whispered through the black ship roared now, filling the corridors with overlapping cries. Some were human, echoes of long-lost builders. Others were alien, tones of empires that had existed before the Tyrants. The vault was not just a prison. It was a tomb, a library, and a seed of something far beyond their understanding. The Tyrants' final transmission reached them then. Their voice, sharp and filled with venom, carried not arrogance but desperation. They warned the humans that what they were about to release was the very force that had once threatened all creation. The Empire had built its throne not only to dominate but to contain. "Destroy us," the voice said, "and you destroy yourselves." The crew faltered, their fury clashing with the heavy truth. To win was to risk losing everything. The captain gave no command. The decision was not one voice alone. It was all of them, the ship itself, the legacy of humanity bound into one flame. And so the crew moved together, guiding the ship toward the sphere, the black ship's core aligning with the chained light. A torrent of energy erupted as they fused, the chain snapping, the prison unraveling. The void shook, the citadel cracked, and for one blinding moment, it felt as though the universe itself was burning. What emerged from the sphere was not a monster of teeth and shadow. It was a storm of memory, a wave of light and thought that surged outward, sweeping through fleets, worlds, and stars. The crew staggered as the flood filled them, showing them fragments of everything the Tyrants had hidden. Civilizations erased, voices silenced, flames extinguished long before their time. But within that tide was also the strength of all who had resisted, all who had dreamed of freedom but never lived to see it. It was not just destruction, it was wrath given form, humanity's and countless others bound together in fire. The Empire's fleets broke in chaos. Their ships scattered, their discipline shattered as the wave of memory tore through them. The Tyrant's citadel began to collapse, consumed not by human weapons, but by the very force they had spent eons containing. The black ship, engulfed in light, burned brighter than ever before, every scar and fracture glowing like molten fire. The crew could no longer tell where their own thoughts ended and the ship's will began. They had become part of something greater, something that burned with the rage of the forgotten. And yet, in the heart of victory, the twist came. The wave of wrath did not stop at the citadel. It spread outward, unstoppable, racing through the stars like a fire through dry grass. Worlds not yet touched by tyranny trembled as the energy surged toward them. This was not vengeance measured by justice. It was fire that consumed everything in its path. The crew realized too late that humanity's weapon was never meant to be a tool of balance. It was a storm that could not distinguish between oppressor and innocent. The engineer's voice, raw and broken, shouted over the comms. "We've become the flame itself. If we don't control it now, there will be nothing left to save." The crew scrambled, desperate to bring the ship back under their command, to bend the wave's fury before it destroyed the very future they had fought to free. The captain, their face pale with determination, made the final choice. They connected their mind directly to the ship's core, sacrificing themselves to anchor the fire, to turn it away from endless destruction. The crew watched in silence as the captain's body fell still, their presence absorbed into the ship. Slowly, painfully, the wave bent. The storm of wrath turned from uncontrolled destruction into something sharper, more focused. It consumed the Empire, its fleets, its strongholds, until the Tyrants were nothing but ashes scattered across the stars. Then, at last, the fire receded, pulled back into the heart of the black ship. The citadel was gone, the empire shattered, and humanity stood free for the first time in countless generations. Yet the cost was heavy. The ship, now scarred and silent, drifted through the void, carrying within it the echoes of all it had released. The crew knew that though they had won, they had also awakened something that could never again be caged. The black ship's flame would forever burn, a reminder that wrath was both salvation and danger, and as the crew tried to steady themselves, as they looked out upon a galaxy no longer chained but not yet safe, the unexpected final twist revealed itself. Deep within the ship's systems, a signal pulsed, a fragment of thought left behind by the captain before they vanished into the core. It was not a farewell, but a warning. The Tyrants were not the last. The darkness we feared still waits beyond the stars. The crew exchanged glances, their triumph tempered by the weight of what lay ahead. They had defeated the Empire. They had freed humanity. But the true enemy had not yet revealed itself. And the black ship, carrying the flame of wrath and memory, was no longer just a weapon of rebellion. It was the first line of defense in a war that had only just begun. The silence after the storm was heavier than the roar of battle. Where once fleets of the Empire had filled the void with fire and fury, now only fragments of wreckage drifted, glowing faintly in the fading light of dying engines. The citadel, once a symbol of untouchable power, was nothing more than dust scattered across the stars. The galaxy had witnessed the fall of its ancient tyrants, and the flame of the black ship had been the hand that tore down their throne. But victory did not feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion, like the deep ache that comes after surviving something no one thought could be survived. The crew moved quietly through the halls of the ship, repairing damage where they could, tending to the wounded, and counting those who had been lost. They carried themselves with a strange stillness, each of them aware that history had just changed, yet none certain what would come of it. The captain's chair remained empty, the sacrifice that anchored the fire fresh in every heart. Their voice lingered in the crew's minds like a ghost, guiding them even in absence. In the quiet, the defectors from the Empire finally spoke more freely. They revealed the truth that had been hidden under centuries of fear. The Tyrants had not been invincible. They had been vulnerable all along, clinging to the vault not only as a weapon of control, but as their shield against the greater threat beyond the known stars. They had enslaved and crushed countless civilizations, but always with one eye on the horizon, terrified that the darkness would one day return. The Empire's cruelty had been born not only from arrogance, but from fear. This knowledge did little to excuse their crimes, but it gave clarity. They had not been gods. They had only been afraid. The survivors debated their next steps. Some believed the black ship should carry its flame to every world, to ensure no tyrant could ever rise again. Others urged caution, warning that the fire inside the ship was too powerful, too unpredictable to wield without risking another storm of destruction. The engineer, who had seen the ship's systems up close during the climax, admitted that the black ship was no longer fully theirs to command. It had become something greater, a living vessel tied to the memories of countless civilizations. It would listen, yes, but it would also act on its own. Humanity's wrath had become its own will. As the days passed, signals from across the galaxy began to pour in. Worlds once enslaved by the Empire were waking to freedom, their chains broken, their skies no longer patrolled by the tyrants' fleets. Some sent messages of thanks, calling the humans saviors. Others cried out in fear, seeing only the shadow of the black ship's flame and wondering if they had traded one ruler for another. The crew understood their doubts. The fire that had freed the galaxy was also fire that could consume it. Trust would not come easily. Amid these struggles, the crew found a quiet place for reflection. They remembered Earth, the home they had left behind, the home that had fallen so long ago. They carried its memory in their blood, in their words, in their stubbornness to fight against impossible odds. Though the planet itself was gone, its people lived on in them. The black ship was more than a weapon. It was a piece of Earth's soul cast into the stars. A reminder that even in the face of empires, humanity's spirit burned unbroken. The crew held a ceremony for those who had fallen, standing together in the observation deck while the stars stretched endless around them. They spoke the names of their dead one by one until the silence afterward felt like a promise that they would not let those sacrifices fade into the dark. The flame of humanity was not only vengeance, it was memory, a refusal to let the past be erased. The twist that lingered was the captain's final warning. The tyrants had fallen, but they had not been the true end. Beyond the mapped stars, something else waited. Something that had once threatened all life. The Empire had chained it, feared it, and perhaps even shaped its rule around it. Now the black ship carried both the flame of humanity and the echo of that ancient storm. The crew did not know when the darkness would return, only that it would, and when it came, they would be the first to meet it. Instead of despair, this knowledge sparked resolve. Humanity had survived its own destruction, had risen again to face empires older and stronger than itself, and had torn them down. Whatever waited in the shadows of the cosmos, humanity would not face it with fear. They would face it with the same fire that had carried them through every trial. The black ship's flame was no longer just wrath, it was hope. The engineer suggested setting a course not back toward Earth's grave, but forward into uncharted space. If the darkness was coming, then they would not wait for it to arrive on its own terms. They would meet it head-on, just as they had met every challenge before. The crew agreed. They had fought for freedom, and freedom was not only survival. Freedom was the choice to step forward, to keep moving, to never again bow to fear. As the ship's engines lit the void once more, the crew stood together on the deck, watching the stars stretch into rivers of light. They knew they were not just survivors of a war. They were the first voices of a new age, one where humanity was no longer hidden, no longer silenced, no longer forgotten. The black ship carried their flame, and with it, the memory of every life lost to tyranny. Wherever they went, the stars would know. Humanity had risen, and it would never kneel again. The galaxy stirred in their wake. Worlds rebuilt, peoples once broken by the Empire began to rise with newfound strength. Some reached out to one another, beginning the fragile steps of alliance. Others watched cautiously, waiting to see if humanity's fire would burn them too. But whether in gratitude or in fear, all now knew the same truth. The tyrants were gone, and the age of silence was over. In the heart of the black ship, where the captain's presence lingered like a quiet ember, the flame pulsed steadily. It was not the raging storm it had been, nor the destructive tide that nearly consumed them all. It was steady now, like a heartbeat waiting. The crew understood what it meant. Wrath had carried them to victory, but what they needed now was balance, strength tempered by wisdom, fire guided by memory. As they disappeared into the unknown, the crew carried with them the lessons of everything they had endured. That tyranny could be broken. That freedom came with responsibility. That fire could both destroy and illuminate. And that humanity, no matter how small or scattered, had a strength that could shake the stars. The black ship's flame was no longer only about burning wrath. It was the promise that humanity's story would never again be erased. And so the ship vanished into the starlight, not as a weapon of vengeance, but as a beacon for a future still unwritten, its fire burning steady against the endless dark.